In March 2002, in the small town of Walton-on-Thames in Surrey, 13-year-old Amanda Millie Dowler disappeared. She'd last been seen at the Walton railway station, having stopped for coffee with her friends on her way home from school. But after failing to arrive home, she was reported missing by her family. Millie was never seen alive again. What followed was an agonizing period of uncertainty for Dowler's family. In the following months, a man was convicted of falsely claiming to have murdered her and for sending messages to the Dowlers threatening to also murder Millie's sister. An unrelated woman was found to have sent multiple text messages to the family claiming to be their missing daughter, and yet another man was revealed to have sent the family false information claiming their daughter had been kidnapped and sent as a sex worker to Poland. Around 6 months after her disappearance, Millie's decomposed body was found by hikers near the town of Yateley, 22 miles from her last sighting. A serial killer named Levi Belfield was later found to have abducted, assaulted, and murdered her. But as the facts of the brutal murder of Millie Dowler came together, what arose was a deafening scandal, one of the most significant in British history. Several months after Belfield's trial ended in 2011 with a whole life tariff for the murder of Dowler and others, astonishing revelations emerged. The Guardian reported that Millie's voicemail had been accessed by journalists working for the News of the World newspaper through its private investigator, Glenn Mulcair. It was revealed that the journalists had deleted messages, including potential evidence, from the mailbox when it had become full in order to free up space for new messages which they could eavesdrop on. Most harrowingly, the deleted messages had led Millie's family to cling to the faint possibility that she might still be alive. An investigation was launched, which revealed a string of such practices carried out by the newspaper. The phone hacking had targeted relatives of dead British soldiers, relatives of terrorist attack victims, celebrities, lawyers, and public servants, amongst many others. All of it was completely illegal. News of the World was a British tabloid with a long and successful, if controversial, history. It was founded in 1843 during the Industrial Revolution as a modest publication catering to an increasingly literate working class audience. Although a broadsheet, its format was geared towards gripping crime stories, scandals, and a unique focus on entertainment rather than formal news. Over time, it began to switch its focus entirely toward matching the interests of a nation hungry for dramatic and relatable stories. A common theme in its reporting was on the sex lives of Britain's rich and famous, for which it was nicknamed News of the Screws by the satirical magazine Private Eye. At the turn of the 20th century, News of the World began to adopt an ever more provocative journalistic approach. Under the direction of Sir Elmsley Carr, its editor for 50 years from 1891, it capitalised on a public appetite for sensationalism, bold headlines, lurid details, and provocative narratives, all of which became the hallmark of its reporting. A low price and knack for turning everyday events into compelling stories struck a tone with the public, and the tabloid went on to have a profound impact in shaping media practices and narrative building. On the eve of World War II, News of the World's weekly circulation had topped 4 million, and less than 20 years later, it became the best-selling broadsheet newspaper in the world. Still, as the 1950s turned into the 1960s and competing news platforms began to proliferate, the paper's circulation began to decline. In 1968, the paper, by now more than 100 years old, was bought by an ambitious media magnate from Australia, one who'd gone on to also buy The Sun, The Times, and Sky, and who answered to the name Rupert Murdoch. Murdoch's acquisition of the paper bore hallmarks of the Machiavellianism that was to come. As rivals for the purchase dithered, he struck fast and decisively, clinching the paper at the 11th hour with a staggering £34 million offer and securing the paper before rival magnates could deliver. The paper became part of Murdoch's enormous news international media conglomerate, and his changes were swift and electrifying. Murdoch's strategy for the tabloid was to lean on higher circulation and captivating stories, and the paper turned further towards tactics that blurred the lines between legitimate reporting and outright sensationalism. News of the World would soon come to attract a vast readership and was later referred to by the BBC as the king of the Sunday tabloid. facts. News of the World had a profound impact on news reporting and was responsible for a number of significant moments in the sphere of journalism and open access information. In the early 2000s, the paper began a campaign to name and shame alleged child sex offenders in the wake of the harrowing abduction and murder of 8-year-old Sarah Payne. The paper has also campaigned for the introduction of Sarah's Law, which was later enacted and which granted the right to public access to the sex offenders register. Around the same time, undercover journalist Marza Mahmoud, or the Fake Sheik, used undercover stings to target high-profile individuals such as the Countess of Wessex and a former England football manager. News of the World claimed Mahmoud alone had secured the conviction of more than 250 criminals. However, Mahmoud was unable to carry out his investigations under false pretenses, which by now had become a feature of the paper's operation. He stood as one reflection of an environment in which invasive practices, such as phone hacking, were used to secure exclusive information. All these led to an even greater circulation, but would ultimately result in widespread legal and moral scrutiny, and some practices would stoop even beyond the pale of simple immorality. In the early 2000s, the first serious allegations involving News of the World's practices emerged. The previous year, the anti-corruption squad of the Metropolitan Police ran Operation Nigeria, which scrutinised the actions of several private investigators suspected of offences including phone tapping, deception, the stealing of personal information, and the stalking and harassment of high-profile figures, including government investigators. One of the suspects, Jonathan Rees, was also accused of the murder of his business partner and fellow private investigator Daniel Morgan in 1987. The investigation determined that Rees and others had been frequently solicited by media platforms controlled by Rupert Murdoch, such as News of the World and The Times, as well as some owned by Robert Maxwell, including the Daily Mirror and Sunday Mirror. It was revealed that the News of the World on its own had paid Rees more than £150,000 a year for his services. The murder charges against Rees and his co-accused, Sid Fillery, were dismissed in 2011, although in the intervening period, Rees was convicted of conspiring to plant drugs on a woman so her husband could gain custody of their child and served 5 years in prison. Around the same time, Fillery was convicted of possessing indecent images of children and later disappeared from private investigation. Years later, it was determined that Rees and Fillery had begun to surveil Detective Chief Superintendent David Cook, the man who supervised the murder inquiry against them, with News of the World again being implicated. Rees and Fillery had reportedly managed to obtain Cook's home address, payroll number, and information about his mortgage payment figures. They'd taken to physically following him and his young children, and, as an ominous sign of what was to come, had attempted to access the personal voicemail of Cook and his wife. The men had been able to procure the personal information of the chief superintendent through another private investigator, Glenn Mulcair, the man later implicated in the hacking of Millie Dowler's mailbox. Mulcair had, in turn, been directed to retrieve the information by his handlers, senior executives and News of the World. Yet in spite of this, it was later revealed that the Metropolitan Police, despite considerable evidence of malfeasance by News of the World, had not come after the paper with any great vigour. Instead, representatives of Scotland Yard held an informal meeting with the recently appointed editor of the paper, a woman named Rebecca Brooks, whose name would later be infamously tied to the nefarious practices of the publication. Needless to say, little came of the meeting. The newspaper's devious practices were now in full rigour, and it would only be several years later when they would be fully brought to life. For years, the tactics of News of the World, from deceit to blackmail to surveillance, well, it seemed to work. The paper was flying high, with a healthy weekly readership which reached into the millions. Certainly not bad figures for a publication of its age, being more than 150 years old as it entered the 21st century. And in spite of its age, News of the World's circulation rivaled much younger publications such as the Daily Mail, Daily Mirror, Daily Star, the Financial Times, The Guardian, The Sun, The Independent, and others in terms of its circulation. Even so, possibly in light of the rise of these competitors, the paper's circulation had still not regained its circulation peak of 8.4 million in 1951. It was perhaps this which led the publication, through Rupert Murdoch, to even greater depths of deviancy. In addition to phone hacking, bribery became a common tool for illicit access to information. Reporters were known to pay off police officers, government officials, and even individuals close to their subjects to obtain confidential details that could boost their stories. This culture of corruption was encouraged by editors including Rebekah Brooks and Andy Coulson, enabling the tabloid to scoop rivals at any cost, even if it meant undermining legal and moral standards. Its practices didn't stop at hacking and bribery though. News of the World's reporters frequently resorted to blackmail, threatening individuals with the exposure of damaging personal information if they didn't cooperate. This coercive approach added another layer of exploitation and manipulation to their already invasive tactics. The combination of these contributed to a climate of fear and mistrust as individuals felt increasingly vulnerable to the invasive powers of the press. But it wasn't just individuals who were affected. Only 1 year after Operation Nigeria, another major police investigation led to more revelations. A covert inquiry by the Information Commissioner's Office in 2002 led to raids of the offices of various newspapers and private investigators in an attempt to determine what personal information they'd accumulated. What became known as Operation Motorman led the ICO to the door of Steve Whittemore, another private investigator working for News of the World. What they found was more than 13,000 requests for confidential information from newspapers and magazines. Whittemore's network and contacts had allowed him to access the confidential records of banks, telephone companies, hotels, and prisons. Organizations who'd had their information accessed included BT Group, Goldman Sachs, Hang Seng, and the Glen Parva and Stockton prisons. It was even revealed that the paper had succeeded in hacking the correspondences of aides to Prince William, as well as Liberal Democrat MP Simon Hughes and 2 prominent football agents, among others. Amidst the investigation into the royal phone hacking, a recording of Glenn Mulcair instructing a journalist on how to hack into a private voicemail was uncovered. Mulcair was arrested alongside the paper's royal editor Clive Goodman for illegally intercepting mobile phone messages in 2007. Both men were convicted, but a settlement was paid out of court. Mulcair's part in the debacle was far from over. Still, the successive scandals did not yet result in major trouble for the paper. News of the World convinced its readers that the royal hacking scandal was a once-off and life continued on as normal. But all this would change in 2011 in what became a historic outcry following revelations which began with the phone hacking of Amanda Dowler. In June 2011, The Guardian, through investigative journalist Nick Davies, published an article detailing revelations that would bring Britain to a standstill. In the period after 2007 and the exposure brought by the royal hacking scandal, News of the World had been dogged by a stream of legal cases from individuals who accused them of invasion of privacy. As had been the case when Glenn Mulcair was convicted, the paper, through its parent company News International, had taken to stamping out its issues with cash settlements. But it was the volume of these which caused The Guardian's writers to pay attention, and what came next was a series of startling revelations. First, returning to the disgraced private eye, Jonathan Rees, The Guardian alleged a web of covert actions he'd carried out on behalf of the News of the World through its contractors, which reached from the highest of high society down to individuals like Dowler, who were in the public eye for little reason other than their own misfortune. The Guardian revealed that Rees bought and sold confidential data on anybody who was of interest to his clients in Fleet Street, running a network of so-called blaggers who would access the required information on his behalf. Rees's blaggers would call bodies like the Inland Revenue Service, the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, and various banks and phone companies to trick them into handing over private data. One blagger had been successful in obtaining the bank details of Prince Edward and the Countess of Wessex. Others had gained similar information from the prestigious Coutts Bank regarding the Duke and Duchess of Kent, as well as Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, Prime Minister Tony Blair, High Chancellor Jack Straw, MPs Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell, former Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, Shadow Home Secretary Gerald Kaufman. These were also all affected. One investigator working for Rees revealed he went so far as to arrange burglaries of public figures to steal material for newspapers. As for Glenn Mulcair, while in the full-time employ of the paper, he was revealed to have accessed the personal information of 2 commissioners of the Metropolitan Police, while Rees found time to target an assistant commissioner in a similar fashion. Between the private eyes, the blaggers, and News of the World journalists themselves, The Guardian revealed instances of phone and computer hacking, intimidation and blackmail, and a wide variety of other transgressions. It was also revealed that Scotland Yard had had great difficulty in uncovering the mass interference due to the large networks of informers assisting the network from within the force. The Guardian also described just how the journalists managed to hack the personal voicemails of such high-profile people, revealing there was no advanced science behind it. They just guessed. The journalists realized that very few individuals changed their voicemail pins from the default settings, which was typically either 0000 or 1234. As such, they were able to access the mailboxes simply by identifying, with the help of private investigators, the personal phone number of the target. A blagger would ring the number, hope it went to voicemail, then guess the individual's pin. In a time before the digital era, what they'd have inside was effectively the full contents of the individual's life. And within a short period, the journalists were experts at accessing this highly personal area of their target's life. The resulting scandal was apocalyptic, and News of the World vanished almost in a flash. The Guardian article immediately led to public outcry, and as the flames of fury spread, News International tried to contain the damage. Reporters and editors denied any knowledge, while executives assured the public that it was the work of a few rogue journalists. But with the police under pressure for their own complacency, investigations continued at speed. The deeper investigators dug, the worse it became. Celebrities, politicians, crime victims, the grieving families of soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, all were revealed to have had their phones hacked. It became clear that News of the World built its empire on the systematic invasion of privacy, and now the world was to know. By the time Murdoch flew to London to take control of the crisis, advertisers were pulling out and public pressure was unrelenting. On July 7th, 2011, only 1 month after Nick Davies' Guardian article was published, News International announced that News of the World would cease publication. The infamous final edition, published on the 10th of July, carried a simple headline: "Thank you and goodbye." The final issue was bought by around 3.8 million people, and saw the paper see out its 170-year history in infamy. But the story was far from over. The scandal triggered what became known as the Leveson Inquiry, a judicial public inquiry ordered by then Prime Minister David Cameron to investigate press ethics and media conduct. Chaired by Lord Justice Leveson, it exposed the dark underbelly of British journalism, cosy relationships between politicians and media moguls, bribery of police officers, and a culture where journalistic ambition trumped basic ethics. In November 2012, after months of damaging testimony from journalists, victims, and officials, including a highly reluctant appearance by Murdoch himself, the Leveson report was published. It called for an independent, government-backed press regulator, which threatened a severe shake-up for an industry long left to operate with relative impunity. While Murdoch's empire survived, News of the World was kaput. The fallout led to several high-profile arrests, including former editors Rebecca Brooks and Andy Coulson, and the debacle permanently tarnished the credibility of British tabloids. And the echoes of the scandal still linger. It wasn't just the fall of a newspaper, it was a moment in time where the world saw, with stark clarity, how power, profit, and the press had entwined in an effort to undermine the very democracy it had claimed to serve. From pervasive phone hacking to corruption, bribery, and blackmail, the scandal came to represent one of the darkest chapters in the history of journalism. The revelations also forced a critical reassessment of journalistic ethics, ensuring invasive methods would never be tolerated. However, while News of the World may have folded, this wasn't a fate shared by many publications. You see, in spite of the nature and scale of News of the World's malfeasance, they were far from the only ones who'd done what they did. In fact, going all the way back to 2002 and Operation Motorman, it was revealed that the manipulation of personal information and attempts to access these was a practice pursued by at least 30 mainly tabloid newspapers in Britain. The inquiry found that the newspaper with the highest number of personal information requests was the Daily Mail at 952, with News of the World only fifth largest at the time, with 182 transactions from 19 journalists. The Daily Mail rejected the accusations of the Motorman report, and most other papers saw out the scandal as well. Moreover, in spite of the controversy, Murdoch's financial success hardly suffered. As the scandal wound down in 2012, the Murdoch estate remained standing at around $10 billion, according to Bloomberg. By the end of 2018, Murdoch's personal fortune had soared to almost $19 billion. 1 year later, Walt Disney Co. carried out a gargantuan purchase of several 21st Century Fox assets, including FX and the National Geographic, for which Murdoch received $12 billion, which he reportedly distributed to his children. Resultantly, his net worth dived from $19 to $7 billion. But it has since once more, and Murdoch's current fortune is estimated at around $13 billion. Following the Leveson report, Rebekah Brooks was charged with conspiracy to hack phones, conspiracy to pervert the court of justice, and conspiracy to commit misconduct in public office. She was, however, found not guilty on all charges. In September 2015, Rebekah Brooks was confirmed as CEO of News UK, the renamed News International, re-establishing a working relationship with Rupert Murdoch, founder and chairman of News Corp, and founder and executive chairman of American conservative cable news channel Fox News. Andy Coulson was less fortunate, being found guilty of one charge of conspiracy to intercept voicemails and sentenced to 18 months in prison in 2014. But Coulson was released that same year, having served less than 5 months of his 18-month prison sentence. In 2016, Coulson launched a new corporate PR agency called Coulson Chappell, offering communication strategy services for firms. 1 year later, Coulson Chappell was awarded a contract by the Telegraph Media Group to improve the standing of the company's publications, the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph. Former royal editor Clive Goodman was sentenced to 4 months in prison in 2007 for his role in the royal phone hacking, and was fired by News of the World after his release. He was later re-investigated in the wake of the Leveson report and charged with paying public officials for access to confidential royal phone directories. During his trial, he admitted to hacking Prince Harry, Prince William and Kate Middleton's voicemails hundreds of times, but also claimed that hacking was widely known inside the newspaper and was done with the approval of senior executives. Goodman was not convicted of the bribery charges after the jury failed to reach a verdict. The Crown Prosecution Service later dropped the case. The paper's chief private investigator, Glenn Mulcair, pleaded guilty in 2014 to phone hacking charges, having previously served 6 months in prison in 2007 in the wake of the royal phone hacking scandal. He was sentenced to a further 6 months in 2014, but served only 5 weeks. He later declared bankruptcy due to legal costs and compensation claims, and otherwise kept a low profile ever since, like his co-conspirator, Clive Goodman. Jonathan Rees was not convicted for his suspected part in the scandal. He was not convicted for his suspected involvement in the murder of his business partner either, and the 1987 murder of Daniel Morgan remains unsolved. Steve Whittemore, arrested in 2003's Operation Motorman, was proven to have illegally brought personal data on behalf of papers including News of the World, but he too avoided jail under the terms of a court-ordered conditional discharge.